Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our November safety update. I'm Gary Rowe, your host today. My colleague Andrea was meant to be joining me, but she's not feeling well today. So I think Andrea might be listening in. If you are, Andrea, I hope you get well soon. Okay, let's look at what we're going to cover this morning with you. So the title of our latest newsletter was Do Good Safety Systems Help? I'm just going to explore that briefly with you shortly. I've came across a case where a journey injury has been defined, what is and is not. This is primarily in relation to workers' comp. Claim farming's been banned. Interesting heading. Illness not declared by a worker in relation to a dismissal. I'll explain that. And a lone worker electrocuted. Now, probably in relation to overhead power lines, and that's not overly surprising. Unfortunately, these accidents happen a bit. However, I'm going to explain the subtleties of that particular case with you this morning. Before we do, as you know, I like to just raise a question or two just to get our brain working for the morning. So, question one, is a worker's outburst, loudly venting disappointment, disagreement, or venting my feelings against a fellow worker or supervisor, is that bullying per the psychological health regulations? Okay, so it's an outburst. It is loud, and you might find it offensive or uncomfortable. The question is, does that constitute bullying? So I'll share the results of a recent court case, which will support the answer I'm going to give you at the end of today's session. I've got two questions today. Question two, ladders taller than 2 metres are now banned in the workplace by the OHS falls prevention regulations, and you'll be familiar with the term the 2 metre rule. For example, a judge recently said the employer should have used a scissor lift or other safer worker heights equipment. All right, so a judge is not me. A judge is now saying the employer should not have allowed the use of this tall ladder. So there's the question. We'll come back to both of these at the end of this session. So let's have a look. Do good safety systems help? I think most of you will understand it doesn't matter whether they help or not, we have to have them. So there's the first point. The general duty of care, that we have a safe workplace, that we have safe tools and equipment and plant, and we have a safe system of work and people appropriately trained and supervised. So we know we've got an anchor point in Section 21 of the Victorian Act and Section 19 in interstate in the Workplace Safety Act. So we have a high level requirement. We've got to have a safety system. So today is not about whether you have one or not. It actually is whether this is actually really helpful for us, particularly for many companies are increasingly looking to go through to certification of their safety system. Now that may be prompted by customers either demanding or requiring that of your business, or there could be some legislative requirement somewhere. There's not a lot, but there could be somewhere in some jurisdictions or industries. So let's have a look. So after the Esso a gas plant explosion back in 1998, and I went back over this and came across it just recently, and I found it interesting to read what the Royal Commission said about the safety management system that Esso had at that time. And I do point out this is not an anti-Esso comment. I have every reason to believe they have good, competent, strong safety systems. But here's what was found after the accident, over 25 years ago. One, it was repetitive. It included circular references and went round and round and kept referencing other things that had already been mentioned. Contained unnecessary cross-referencing, similar. Much of the language that the judge said was impenetrable. That means when you read it, you didn't understand what it was they wanted you to do. So it was unclear. And it was difficult for operational staff and managers to operationalize the system because it was more theoretical. So what this led me to think about was electrical test and tag and SWMS in our general workplaces today. And what I can tell you is that what these things tend to do, as the Royal Commission found in relation to SO safety system, they take on a life of their own. So now think of what is electrical test and tag? What has it taken on as a life of its own? Guess what? Every bit of item tagged, and the auditors only look at the date on the tags. That's it. They're not looking where the equipment is safe. They're checking whether the item is tagged and whether that date is expired. And you get caught out somewhere, because in a big organisation, there'll always be a tag missing or a tag out of date, even with good faith that you try. Similarly with SWMS, people have unofficially said, we've got to have this dated. I want to know who approved this SWMS, and I want it written down. I want the signatures of every worker on this SWMS. Now, all of those are eminently sensible things to have on the SWMS, by the way, so don't get me wrong. You can have this. But what you're not allowed to do is assume that that's the primary thing that makes the work safe. It's not. The thing that makes a SWMS work and add safety is nothing to do with the date, nothing to do with who approved it, nothing to do whether the worker signed it or not. And even those workers who have signed it, when actually have been interviewed and questioned in court, have simply said, I was told to sign it and I did. And the courts have accepted that that doesn't mean to say they understood it or agreed to it. So their reading and writing skills may be insufficient to even comprehend what's being put onto the SWMS. So they take on a life of their own, that certain things become the priority over safety. So let's just understand there's only two key things that have to be on the SWMS: that you identify the hazards of that task, and now you tell me how I'm going to control them. Full stop. Nothing else. Everything else, if you like, I'll call it cream on the cake. It is not essential and it's not adding to safety. So they take on a life of their own. So this is a little bit of a tip from this morning, is watch out and have a look at your own systems and say, gee, have these taken on a life of their own? Are they now directing us down some administrative thing that we keep looking for, but we have lost sight of, do they actually help improve safety for the people doing the job? I have never seen a worker yet out in the field with a 12-page SWMS. You will find somebody with a one-page checklist. And so that's our challenge. And that's one of the things that we probably should be looking for. The other thing I came across some time ago was an article that confirmed that there is no correlation between companies with certified safety systems and those who don't. So it's nice to certify if your customers, clients, and your executive team say, a marketing manager says we need this, and if that's helpful for the business, that's great. Nothing wrong with that, certifying. All you need to understand is certification is no greater assurance that you won't have a serious accident or defects in your system. So, as I've mentioned, the general duty of care, it's not optional whether we have a system, we have to have a system. Beware of this complacency with bloated systems, and you can't penetrate them and understand them all, and nor can the workers. So we just assume it's big, it must be good, it must be working. We need both the safety system, and you need a culture to use it correctly. I think that's the essence of what I intended in the article. Do good safety systems help? Yes, they do when it's part of your culture. Just be aware of them taking a life of their own and people focusing almost purely on the administrative items surrounding that and not the core safety issues. And say, does it identify all the key risks? Does it outline in simple terms, cookbook recipe, step 1, step 2, step 3, what do I have to do to control that risk? If you do that well, if you do it on one page, and we allow as a rule of thumb in our business, a SWMS can be one page or one page double-sided, but never longer. And if it's bigger than that, break the job out into pieces so you still end up with a one page for each SWMS. That's our tip there. And obviously building the culture, it's executives that provide the leadership and other managers. And so one of the things is what do people do to help demonstrate that commitment to safety and safety leadership? And one of the best things we've found is simply going out and talking to people. So you might call it a safety walk. And what I can share with you is that your managers, and particularly your executives who are unfamiliar with this and may therefore be uncomfortable being asked to do it, they need a bit of help and coaching. So don't just issue an edict. Somehow you bludgeon it through that all managers are to do a safety walk every month or every week or whatever edict you want to put. They need support and coaching, and to show them how simple it is and easy it is. Maybe you can go with them. Maybe you can go with them, certainly for the first few times, and show them how easy it is. So show your leadership as you go through that as well. So the other one is a journey claim occurred. So bear with me. It was a female lawyer driving to work. She had work files in the car, so maybe a box or two in the back of the car, and she was bringing them from a site back to the office. And there was a motor vehicle collision. And I believe that she sustained some injury, so she's looking for workers' compensation. But this is a work journey. This is not a private issue on her own part, so it's part of work. And the court concluded it was not a work journey. So let me just share with you what the judge outlined is that to be a work journey, there had to be something specific about the need for the journey and something about its start or finish point. So what do I mean, the need? What was concluded is that the female lawyer didn't go out of her way, was actually coming from a normal home to a normal place of work. Just happened she had a collision on the way, and just happened she had some work files in the car during that journey. And so there was nothing special about the trip. So part of the guidance is something like if somebody's called out from home and they've got to return to work to deal with some urgent matter, and there's a motor vehicle collision or journey accident, that would be regarded as workers' comp. If somebody's required to go to some remote work area at a specific time of the company's need, then that may well be a work journey as well. So traveling from your normal home to work, and just so happens that an accident happens, even though you're carrying work files, doesn't actually fit that criteria. So I just thought I'd mention that. We've actually got a case that defines this and clearly spells it out. Now, what I can tell you is I've been working in workplace safety for over 35 years. So I'm a qualified safety engineer, fellow of the Safety Institute, fellow of the Institution of Engineers, a certified practicing risk manager. And so bear with me, maybe it's my sense of humor, but I smile when I come across something new. I didn't say it's wrong. I just said it's amusing to me. Maybe it's my sense of humor. That a couple of new terms have come up that I've never heard of before in relation to workplace safety. One was litigation neurosis, and the other was, bear with me, embitterment disorder. So here's the two terms. I'm not trying to be derogatory here of either the individuals involved in the cases, and I'm not raising these terminology. What I'm telling you, the judges in courts have used these terms. So this is what they've said. So bear with me. A Supreme Court judge recently accepted evidence that an injured labour hire worker developed a kind of litigation neurosis that prevented him from seeking proper medical treatment. So he didn't want to get better because he's got this litigation neurosis, and I've got to complete my litigation before I get better, is the inference from that. So litigation neurosis. I'm not saying it'll get you or I any better if any cases come up, but it's nice to know that you and I may not be raising these points, but it's been recognised in the courts that these conditions actually exist in some people. So the case with embitterment disorder, bear with me, was a worker. This is now in a case in the, it's a federal case with the Fair Work Commission, where it was noted that the worker's moral injury and embitterment disorder caused him to perceive reasonable management action by his employer as bullying. So he was so embittered to the company or to his manager or supervisor that he couldn't see that what they were doing was in fact reasonable management of him and or his condition and circumstances. but he perceived their actions as bullying. And so once again, this is not me or you or I making informal, maybe derogatory comments, but judges forming a view that there is a condition and they see these patterns often. So embitterment disorder and litigation neurosis. So let's see if we can all avoid that ourselves as well. So there was another brief article in our newsletter just titled Bystander Training. And so whenever I see an interesting heading to an article, it always attracts my attention. And so just briefly looking at it, what this is essentially about is a researcher suggesting that employees should consider what they call bystander training. And this is in relation to harassment and bullying, that if you train all of the workers, if they observe any of these adverse behaviours, that they, one, escalate it and report it immediately. They may or may not be in a position to intervene. They may not be appropriate, but hopefully they are. But certainly that it gets reported and escalated. A business can only deal with these type of circumstances if they know they're actually happening. And often the business doesn't know until there's an outburst or a claim or an allegation, or WorkSafe's called in, unbeknownst to the company, that before the company even knows that there was either bullying happening or harassment happening. So this is about simply getting into the information database for a business, what's happening out there. And so you train people, everyone, to say, if you observe this, please just report it. How it's acted on, that may be up to the supervisor or manager, but please let's escalate and report it. So that's what the bystander article was about. And I saw another heading, claim farming banned. And I immediately knew what it meant, although I must admit I haven't heard this term very often. So what is claim farming? So, well, first I'll backtrack. South Australia and Queensland have recently banned claim farming. So what is it? It's where somebody encourages another person to lodge a claim where they receive a benefit or a commission. So the person offering that encouragement has some financial or other benefit from encouraging someone else to lodge a claim. This typically affects health providers and legal firms because they're in the front line with injured people. So let's understand that. I'm not trying to be anti-lawyers or anti-health providers. They need to be careful, though, that what they're not doing is gaining a benefit themselves in encouraging others to lodge claims. So this is only reported in the article I found for South Australia and Queensland. I haven't had time to look up whether Victoria, New South Wales, WA or Tasmania or ACT or Northern Territory have implemented similar. Chances are, as we watch the trends around Australia, that when one jurisdiction does make amendments which are reasonable and practicable, other jurisdictions follow on. So if it's not there, it probably is. But let's say even if it's not, let's just think, what are our values and morals? We probably think, gee, we shouldn't be doing this for our benefit. Our sole interest if somebody's injured should be them and what's best for them. And hopefully you and I, that's our values and that's how we'll treat it, whether there's some legal ban on this or not. So in another case recently, and I thought I'd share this only because we come across this occasionally, where employers feel and I feel like identify that a worker has a safety issue that jeopardises their ability to operate safely or to perform their job safely. So in this case, it was Sydney Trains that was found to have validly dismissed a worker because there was a claim from the worker saying it was an unfair dismissal. The person had what Sydney Trains described as a safety critical role. I'm sorry, I can't recall what it was. I don't know if it was a driver or a signal person or a station platform staff, but it is nevertheless still safety critical. Okay, so there's safety of passengers, safety of operating the trains, however that may come about. And the person had some health conditions which were not declared in the pre-employment application nor in subsequent medical screening. And so when the business found out about this, they dismissed the worker because the worker was unable to undertake their primary role for which they were employed to undertake. You and I know you may have a valid reason for dismissal, then immediately the court switch to did we follow correct and fair due process. And in this case, as I understand it, although it wasn't explored in great depth, that Sydney Trains had, because the dismissal was upheld. And of course, I'm not raising this article because I think there's any joy or comfort in dismissing anyone from their employment. I'm merely showing that the importance that workers need to be open and truthful. So if they've got a health condition, particularly if it's a safety critical role, and you and I and our businesses and our friends will have occasionally safety critical roles, that merely raises the if you like, the importance of that open and truthfulness about health conditions that may impact on that. And then when that occurs in your business, coach your business to make sure you follow correct due process and not rush it through and not be inflammatory about any of the issues. I think you'll probably know that if you're dealing in that area. The last article in our last newsletter was just a lone worker was electrocuted. And as I said, unfortunately, trucks, vehicles and people make contact with overhead power lines and sometimes underground power lines from time to time. And this is tragic and unfortunate. The only point I want to make about why do we mention a lone worker? So this worker, who apparently was on his own, was carrying a 6-metre aluminium pipe. And all I'd say in relation to that is if your business is around agriculture and water systems and you know you're carrying long pipes, did you check the work site? Is there any overhead power lines? Were they properly placarded? Did the swims highlight in the swims there are overhead power lines? Be careful, because this is not a truck or a vehicle now touching the power lines. This is in fact somebody just carrying a pipe, presumably, that has made contact or come too close to the power lines. I think the tragic bit about working alone, because that's not illegal, working alone, but what it does do is increase the need for good communication. Because if somebody's injured, how do they summon first aid? How do they summon medical assistance? How do you respond to them as quickly as possible? I don't recall any evidence offered whether quick support and medical assistance would have saved the person or not, but that's not the point. What we should have had is, in case that was possible, our system for any lone workers, how do they raise the alarm? Who do they raise it with? How do we reasonably respond? So that, and does our SWIMS actually outline the risks at that site? And do we restrict what tasks people can do on their own? So there's just some considerations about working alone. So it just increases stress for family and co-workers, the fact that the worker was not discovered till the next day. So it may not have changed the outcome, but it does certainly increase stress when family and friends know the person was there alone and not discovered for some period of time. And that just increases the heartache of that event. So turning to brighter things. Our next safety networking event, which is a free event coming into Christmas, so we'll call it our Christmas event. We're just going to have the Vic Psychological Health Regs is our main topic for discussion. It's primarily networking. It's not meant to be a training session. And I hope it's informative, but it's not designed to, certainly not a lecture or a presentation or a formal presentation. But we will have some, we think, helpful information and practical information for you if you come along. So 10 a.m. On the Thursday, the 11th of December. We hope those, particularly out the eastern suburbs or in around Melbourne, that happen to be here can make that session. So before we finish up with our limited time, as always, is question 1. Is a worker's outburst loudly venting disappointment, disagreement and feelings? And you know we do this occasionally in families because we feel comfortable more with families that we can be more open and honest. And generally, if it's not a totally dysfunctional family, we can cope with a little bit of outburst. We don't like it, but we can cope with it. At work, we cope with less of it because we don't have to with workers. We don't want to. We don't want to suffer that. But the question is, it was brought as a court case as alleged bullying. I just want to share with you. The general answer is it's not bullying if there's no violence or threats of violence associated with this outburst. So somebody running around with a stick, banging, smashing windows, and maybe threatening people with that stick would be violence or threat of violence. So that would be an exclusion. And if the behaviour is not repeated, so as long as there's no violence or threats and it's not repeated, even though it may be objectionable behaviour, so generally is repeated behaviour which offends people. But violence doesn't have to be repeated, or threats of violence does not have to be repeated. Sexual harassment does not have to be repeated. Once off is enough. But bullying, by definition, is a repeated adverse behaviour in essence. So this is a pattern of behaviour is what we call bullying. Otherwise, it's one of those other things. So there's question one, if you like. So the ladders, tall ladders. So what I can share with you is the Vic OHS Reg 44 Part 5 allows tall ladders, and this is where you could fall 2 metres or more, if all other safety options are not reasonably practicable. In other words, tall ladders, taller than 2 metres, are the least preferred. So understand they're the least preferred if your team are using them. And we need to follow the hierarchy of control. And so you would only be allowed to use those and justify that that was appropriate and safe particularly after a fall or an event, to show that you'd followed the hierarchy of control. Working from the ground was not reasonably practical. Working from scaffolding was not reasonably practical. Using a scissor lift, I couldn't get a scissor lift or a boom elevator in. And so the other options were not reasonably practical. It's a short job. I can do it with 3 points of contact, 2 hands, 1 feet on the ladder. So I've set up the ladder safe. So if you set up the ladder safe, it's safe. I've tried all of the other options and they're not reasonably practical. Then you may use a tall ladder. So tall ladders, higher than 2 metres, are not preferred, but they're not illegal as long as we follow the hierarchy of control. So there's my best guidance for today. So thank you for joining us and for your support as always. And Andrea, I hope you're getting well soon. The small image there is I enjoyed. I had a road trip a couple of weeks ago for over 2 weeks, road trip driving over the Nullarbor Plain. So there's a view of the Great Australian Bight and the very flat Nullarbor Plain and Australia. You can just see how flat our continent is from the greatest southern bight there from Australia. About halfway over, I'm just trying to think, halfway between Ceduna and Eucla, I think, or thereabouts. So there you go. So thank you once again. Hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye.